Well, hello there. My name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today, my good friend Jonathan Cornell from immersiveaudioalbum.com joins us to talk about this Wish You Were Here 50th. We're going to talk about the Blu-ray edition, which does include all of the content that the box set has. And I'm talking about the 50th anniversary box set. So in the course of this review, we're going to talk a little bit, I think, about how we feel about this album. We're going to talk about the format history of this record, with a particular emphasis on surround. I would like to talk a little bit about the extras. Did you have a chance to listen to the demos and the live material? Okay, yep. So we'll touch on that briefly, and just give our overall impressions. I think the kind of thesis of this review is, what's the best mix here? Is it the Atmos mix? Is it the 5.1 mix? Is it the quad mix?
I would add to that as well, if you have kind of all the previous reissues, like if you've got the SACD or the Immersion box set from 2011, like, do you really need to buy this? I think that's often the question, people ask when these albums are reissued time and time again. So hopefully we can address that as well, at least our opinions on it.
Yeah, and I gather that our opinions may not align with everybody's. So the comments section is going to be interesting on this one. But I'll just start by saying that this is my favorite Pink Floyd album. It's bounced around a lot, but due to personal circumstances, it's kind of risen to become the one that I turn to the most. And I would even put this in my top 5, maybe of all time albums. It used to be Animals. But there's just something earnest about this material. I also think it's maybe the last time, maybe the last gasp of that early 70s, more experimental Pink Floyd. Stephen Wilson talks about how Pompeii and Dark Side of the Moon kind of represent this transition from Floyd being an improvisatory rock band to being a conceptual one. And I feel like Wish You Were Here is still kind of riding that line a little bit.
I would say there is definitely kind of a change from Wish You Were Here going into Animals, which is strange because it's the same band, it's the same engineer, different studio.
Yeah.
But I think, the common narrative is that like Animals is kind of when Roger Waters like really starts to take over the songwriting. I mean, there are parts of that, like, that cynical side of Pink Floyd that certainly poke through on this album, like in songs like Welcome to the Machine or Have a Cigar. Yeah. But to answer your question, like, is it my favorite Pink Floyd album? Maybe. I mean, it's kind of a toss-up between this one and Dark Side. The thing I like about this record is I don't quite have like the burnout on it that I do on Dark Side.
Yeah.
Like, if you listen to like, classic rock radio, you're still going to hear like Money all the time. But this album doesn't. I mean, I wouldn't say it's underappreciated because people do consider it one of their greatest records, but it's not quite as ubiquitous as Dark Side of the Moon. And interestingly enough, the Pink Floyd records that my dad had were this one, Dark Side, and The Wall, which I guess were the 3 that were most popular in America. Mm-hmm. For some reason, he skipped Animals, which is too bad because I only discovered that record recently and I really like it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But yeah, of those 3, I mean, The Wall, I think, is a very kind of uneven record. I don't know if that's like a controversial viewpoint. I think it has some of their greatest songs, like Comfortably Numb, but as to listen to the whole thing through, I think is kind of a slog, personally. It'll be interesting if when they do a surround mix of that, if I end up reappraising it. But between Dark Side and Wish You Were Here, it's really a toss-up for me.
Yeah. Well, I do like The Wall, but that's a discussion for another day. Mm-hmm. What was our first item of what was our first topic here? So are we going to talk about the history of the album a little bit?
Yeah, I suppose we should give a little bit of the background, though I imagine a lot of the people watching this would probably already know all this.
Yeah. But
my understanding is, like, before Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, at least in America, were kind of like a cult band. It seems like they were popular in the UK, but they didn't really break in America until Dark Side of the Moon. And it's kind of that age-old thing of like, after you become successful and you have everything you wanted, like where do you go from there?
Yeah.
And I think it took them a long time. Well, they were on tour for a while, and they started working on this record at Abbey Road in 1975, so about 2 years after Dark Side of the Moon. And from what I've read online and looking at interviews with the band, like it seems like they were kind of like aimless for a while, just kind of like jamming in the studio. And I think the theme of the record came about from the experiences they were having, sort of on the industry side. Like all of a sudden they were like this popular band and all these record label executives were interested in them. And I think they started to uncover like the ugly side of the business, because it is a machine.
Yes.
Like the songs suggest. So I think that's part of the record. It's kind of like this sort of empty feeling, like after you have everything,
the absence.
like what's left. Yeah.
And then also I think it's important to mention that they were reflecting on the loss of Syd Barrett.
Yes.
He was very much alive, but not up here. The emotional absence of Syd Barrett kind of losing his mind tragically. There's that really, kind of ominous photo of Syd, and you barely recognize him when he just shows up to the sessions and he's like, "Okay, guys, I'm back. Let's do some music." And, there's just so many kind of like odd coincidences like that surrounding this album. Like you mentioned, it's like we got everything we wanted and now we're sad about it because we don't have any other goals. We don't know where to go next. And I think it's also worth mentioning that they did go into the studio with 2 songs, written that would end up on Animals. Then titled Raving and Drooling and
You've Got to Be Crazy.
You've Got to Be Crazy. Not even Roger can keep them straight. I watched that that YouTube video you sent, which I guess we'll link in the description, and he couldn't even keep them straight. But that was I think he mentioned something about that was one of the first arguments he and David Gilmour had, was that Gilmour wanted those songs to be included, and Roger was like, "No, we've got this whole theme of absence, and those just don't fit."
In those interviews, one of the things that struck me was that like all 4 guys in the band, those interviews were done when Rick Wright was still alive, and everybody seems like happy to talk about this album. Like they're all proud of the end result. It's not like with some of the other records where there's like maybe something that Gilmour wanted on that Waters didn't, or vice versa. I mean, a lot of people think of that sort of combativeness with Pink Floyd, but I was struck by sort of how complimentary they all are, sort of talking about this album, even though the circumstances behind it, like it seems like it was kind of like a bad time for the band. I mean, it wasn't a bad time in the sense that they were really popular. They were selling a lot of records.
Successful,
but I think the internal strife in the band sort of started during this period, and it got worse and worse with the next 3 albums. Up until the final cut, when eventually, they split.
Right. Success isn't everything. There's more to life than monetary gain. And, really that's something that we love about Pink Floyd. I've always admired about them. Is like this is the band that wrote Money, and that's the song that kind of put them on the map. The irony there is just absolutely staggering. So generally what we do is we will talk about the surround history of a band, and for Pink Floyd that is nigh impossible. But we can very easily talk about the surround and reissue history of this album, Wish You Were Here. And you were kind of alluding to that at the beginning.
Yeah, so like Dark Side of the Moon, there was also a quad mix made of this album in the 70s. It was done by Brian Humphreys, who also did the stereo mix of the record. And it was released for like a very limited time. So this record came out in September 75, and then the quad mix came out like a few months later, like sometime in early 76.
Yes.
And Columbia Records stopped doing quad in early 1977. So it was only in print for about a year. So the quad LP of Wish You Were Here is quite rare. Like I've never seen one in like a record store or anything. I had to buy one online on Discogs, and it wasn't cheap at the time. But it was interesting that in this series of interviews that were done at the time, the Immersion box set was released in 2011, David Gilmour actually talked about the quad mix. And his attitude was kind of like, well, the band had put their heart and soul into doing the stereo version. They had all these arguments about balancing things and making it all perfect. And like, they just couldn't be bothered to like repeat that again for the quad mix.
Sure.
So they kind of left the studio, and they left Brian Humphreys to his own devices to do this quad mix. So that for a long time, that was the only surround mix. And then fast forward all the way to 2011, and James Guthrie, who had started working with Pink Floyd on The Wall, and has been kind of like their guy ever since.
Well, Roger Waters too. Like he's done Amused to Death and a couple of Roger's solo records.
I think generally it was James Guthrie would work on like the Roger Waters solo stuff, and then David Gilmour started working with a guy called Andy Jackson.
Oh yeah.
So he did like Momentary Lapse of Reason and Division Bell and all of David's solo records. I think I'm not sure if he did like the one that has There's No Way Out of Here, but he definitely did like Rattle That Lock, On an Island. Yeah. But so James Guthrie is the guy who gets to do like the pre-final cut Pink Floyd remixes. So he did Dark Side of the Moon and 5.1 in 2003 for the 30th anniversary. It was released on a SACD. And then in 2011, he did the same for Wish You Were Here. He did a new 5.1 mix using the original multi-tracks. So in 2011, you had the choice of either you could buy that standalone SACD, which you just showed, or there was this bigger immersion box set, which had it on a Blu-ray. But I think the bigger selling point of the immersion box set for me was that it had the quad mix on it too.
Yes.
And that was the first time the quad mix was in print, for like 40 years or something like that. So what do you get on this new edition? You get all the stuff that was on the immersion box set, including the quad mix, which I think is cool because they didn't put the Dark Side quad mix on the standalone edition that came out 2 years ago. And it's also got this new Atmos mix that's also by James Guthrie.
Yeah.
So there's the 3 different surround mixes. Of course, there's the original stereo mix too, which is, definitive, of course.
Yeah, sure.
The original mixes of these albums, maybe with the exception of Animals, are all really good, I would say.
Yeah.
But with Animals, like also I kind of see the argument why some people like it better than the remix. I think you and I maybe disagree on that.
It's one of the few things you and I actually do disagree on, I think, is that I prefer the original mix of Animals.
And it stems from the fact that I didn't know the record. Like I'm very transparent about that. Like the first time I heard it was the remix. Then I went back to the original mix. So with that framing, I personally like the remix better. And I also like listening to it in surround, of course.
Yeah, sure. And I have some thoughts of that. I don't know, this might get cut, but I did drift in between the Animals original mix and the new surround mix. And previously I've made criticisms about the drum sound. And I was actually kind of surprised that the original mix kind of has that same gated drum sound to it. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a little bit too clean on the new version, but I definitely think that the Atmos mix is in keeping with the tone of the original drums, even if it does sound a little bit, I don't know, processed or something.
To go back to Wish You Were Here, one of the things for me, so I have the immersion box set, I don't have the SACD. This is one of those albums, kind of like, I think like Chicago 2 was another example, where like neither the 70s quad nor the newer 5.1 mix quite like perfectly hit the mark for me. Now this may be controversial because I know a lot of people like his work, but I've never been that huge a fan of James Guthrie as a surround mixer. And this is purely like on the artistic merits. Like there's no, right or wrong way to do a surround mix. It's purely opinions. Yeah. And I think he's a great engineer. I mean, The Wall's an incredible sounding record. And all these mixes sound incredible. Like the 2011 5.1 mix of Wish You Were Here is easily the best sounding version of the album, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But when I listen to these albums, I find the mixes kind of safe, considering sort of how experimental these songs are.
Yeah.
The best moments tend to be the ones that involve like lots of like ancillary sound effects.
Yes.
Like the end of Have a Cigar going into Wish You Were Here with the like swirling and then the radio. Going back to Dark Side of the Moon, obviously like the cash registers and Money, or basically the entire song On the Run with all those swirling sequencers and things. But aside from those couple of moments where there's sort of obvious sound effects moving around or pan behind you, all the instrumentation is kind of like mixed into all the speakers.
Yeah.
So you kind of get this effect where you're sitting in the middle of the room and you feel like that the band is all around you, but you can't necessarily say like, well, the guitar's over there and the keyboard's over there. Like it all just kind of gels together as this sort of homogenous thing.
Yeah.
And the kinds of mixes I've always liked, we talk a lot about Steven Wilson on this channel, are the ones where like it really feels like you're sitting in the middle of the band and you can tell exactly where everything's coming from.
Yeah.
There's like a keyboard in one corner, there's a guitar in the other corner. Now, I'm not saying the key to making a good surround mix is you have to just put all the instruments in one speaker, because that mixing style has led to some of the worst surround mixes that I've heard.
Sure.
A lot of early quad mixes have that problem where everything is just panned and it sounds like you're listening to a bunch of like raw tracks and not like a mix.
It's too discreet. Yeah.
Too discreet. But I think these mixes kind of go the other way for me. Like they're not discreet enough.
Mm-hmm.
And they just feel like kind of not that creative, considering how sort of ambitious and unusual this music is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one exception to that rule is I think the Animals mix is by far the best one he's done, in the sense that it's the most adventurous, like with moving elements and things placed all around. And I think maybe the reason for that is he kind of had more latitude to play with it, because I think the band weren't really happy with the sound of that album.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another part of this too is that these mixes were approved by the band, so you don't know what changes were made. It's hard. I don't know, like what he had to obviously balance, what David Gilmour wanted and what Roger Waters wanted.
I wouldn't ask that of anybody.
I'm always hesitant to, criticize surround mixes, because you don't know like what the background, what the background was, what the directive was. But I feel like when you compare these to the quad mixes, I like the sort of sound stage of the quad, like what they were going for with the way the instruments are placed. But when you listen to these new mixes, the sound quality is so much better. Like jumping between, especially Wish You Were Here, like there's so much like tape hiss on the transfer. And then you go into these newer mixes that are just sonically pristine.
Yeah.
And I wish you could take all the things that are good about the 5.1 mix and apply them to the quad mix. And that was kind of what I was hoping for with the Atmos version of this album. But in a lot of respects, I actually thought the Atmos was kind of a step down from the 5.1 in this case.
I would agree with that.
I think you and I are in agreement on that.
Yeah, we do agree on that particular aspect. And a couple of things, I think it's worth mentioning, and I know this because I read your review. It's linked in the description. But this whole approach to surround mixing that Guthrie has taken is a choice. It's what he intends to do with it. So on those merits, it's successful. He was able to accomplish what he wanted out of them. But that being said, it's still a valid criticism if that's not your approach, like what you would prefer. I think that's, perfectly valid. So I'll kind of just add to what you said by saying that it took me a long time to get to the quad mix, and I've heard it twice. We did talk about it before on our quad mix video, which you guys can go check out. But my first time hearing Wish You Were Here in surround sound was this SACD from this is Analog Productions. And this is one of my very favorite 5.1 discs. And I don't know if that's because it was one of the first ones that I picked up after I got my new Atmos system and could really hear things with great fidelity. But I really enjoy this mix a lot. Now, going back to the quad mix, I hear where you're coming from. Like I appreciate what James Guthrie did with the 5.1 mix. I enjoy the fidelity of it. I think it's the best sounding of the Pink Floyd surround mixes. Maybe some caveats there, but the quad mix is definitely, as you say, it's more discreet. You can hear more of individual instruments. I could point to, I want to say it's like part 8 of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, the funky bit, where you've got clavinets, I think, behind you. You've got like some organ stuff going on. You've got something that sounds like a Lyricon, some guitar, kind of grooving around. I get where you're coming from, that a merger of those two approaches is what I was looking for in the Atmos mix. And that's not really what we got. I agree with you that it's a considerable step down from even the 5.1 mix. And my issue with James Guthrie, and let me preface this by saying that I think that albums like The Wall, The Final Cut, and Amused to Death are some of the best produced albums in human history, in existence. Coming into this, I have really high expectations for his work based on his past accomplishments. And it seems like, starting with the Dark Side of the Moon Atmos, which came out in 2018 or whatever that was, his mixes have drifted toward being very bottom heavy in kind of an unpleasant way to my ears. And particularly his treatment of drums. It comes across very boomy and kind of unwieldy. And this is a consistent problem for me. Like, listen to the Atmos mix of Us and Them, for instance. When the choruses kick in, you can barely hear Nick Mason's drums at all, because it's just, there's just so much stuff going on. And I know we're jumping to Dark Side for just a moment here, but if you listen to that song on the other two mixes, the drums are perfectly audible. In the case of Wish You Were Here, I feel like this mix is a little too modern and a little too aggressive. And I am referring to the new Atmos mix. Would you agree with that?
Well, kind of like I said, the main thing I was looking for was, I would have liked if it was more kind of discreetly approached than the 5.1 mix, but I wasn't expecting that to happen because that wasn't really the case with the Dark Side or Animals mixes.
Yeah.
I guess I was hoping that, I mean, if you're going to go back and mix a record again for Atmos, and, I know a lot of people complain about this, that it's, the same records that have already been done in 5.1 or quad that are going to be done in Atmos. I feel like you want to bring something new to it. Like, you want to use the whole palette that Atmos affords.
Yeah.
For me, you've got those extra speakers that go in the sides. You've got the 4 speakers in the top. And, Wish You Were Here is an album with plenty of stuff you could put in those top speakers, right?
Oh, yeah.
And listening to this record, it kind of felt to me like the 5.1 mix with a few scant moments of things that would pop up in the extra speakers.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning of Welcome to the Machine, one of those acoustic strums comes out of the heights. That was cool. The ambient parts, like the fade in at the beginning of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, you could feel it using the whole space.
Mm-hmm.
Or the wind when the second half starts at the end of the album. There are a couple of these little moments, usually the transitions between the songs, where I felt like I was getting something beyond what the 5.1 mix did. But like you said, the EQ has changed, and somehow become worse than the old 5.1 mix. One of the things that jumped out at me, so you mentioned the drums. I agree, they sound kind of boomy and a little too loud. And I also noticed a lot of the lead solos are too loud. The first guitar part in Shine On You Crazy Diamond, after the down, no, Gilmore has that first solo. Yeah. That sounded like there's this, when you listen to that in the 5.1 mix, it totally sounds like it's in the room with you, this sort of eerie realness to it. And this mix, it just sounds kind of bright and sort of piercing.
Yeah.
I felt the same way about the sax at the end of Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
I actually made that note. The sax sounded almost plastic to me.
Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, those elements seem a little mid-rangier, a little harsher.
Yeah.
I guess it's a trade-off, because I like the couple of moments where things come out of the heights and it sounds cool. But on the whole, I think because of these weird sonic issues, another one that jumped out at me, and I guess this was a deliberate choice, it's weird, is that at the beginning of Wish You Were Here, the vocals are off center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When David's voice first comes in, it's panned slightly to the right, and I was are my speakers calibrated wrong? And then it goes to the center during the chorus.
Yeah.
So I don't know why that was done. It seems like kind of a weird choice, but I feel like because of all these little things that pull you out of the experience, I would just rather listen to the 5.1 mix.
Yeah, it's still my favorite, and I think we should also mention the stereo imaging, or what's the proper way to say that, where it's reversed or something.
So I have to give credit to one of our friends on the Quadraphonic Quad forum for pointing this out. But weirdly enough, so there's 4 mixes on the Blu-ray, right? There's stereo, quad, 5.1 Atmos. And there are a lot of moments in the record where there are things that were hard panned to one side. So at the beginning of Have a Cigar, originally the guitar was on the right. Mm-hmm. And also the radio at the beginning of Wish You Were Here was on the right. And then the second acoustic guitar would come in on the left. So obviously the stereo mix has always been like that. And the 5.1 mix is basically an exact match to the stereo, where everything that was on the right is on the right side of the room, and so on. Now, the quad mix is interesting because I have the original quad LP. And when I play it through my, vintage quad decoder, it basically mirrors the stereo mix. Like the guitar at the beginning, Have a Cigar, is in the right rear speaker, and the radio is in the right front speaker. But basically everything, it's kind of like you took the stereo mix and like did this with an accordion. I'm stealing that metaphor from my friend Dave, who I've done some videos with. But on the immersion set and on this set, which I assume uses just the same transfer from the immersion set, I doubt they went back to the quad tape and actually transferred it again for this new Blu-ray. It's flipped.
Yeah.
So the front left and front right speakers and the rear left and rear right speakers are just flipped over. So everything that was on the left is now on the right, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And the Atmos mix is like that too. So at the beginning, they Have a Cigar, the guitar's on the left instead of the right. The radio, Wish You Were Here, is on the left instead of the right. So, it's not like a deal breaker. It's just sort of a strange observation that we made while listening to it. And it makes you wonder, like, what was the way that they really intended it? Because we were talking about with Songs for the Big Chair, Tears for Fears, there was a controversy where some of the original CDs, the stereo image was flipped.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the song, Shout, the bell would go left to right instead of right to left. I mean, it doesn't really impact the integrity of the mix. It's just kind of an interesting observation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And another few things. There are moments in the Atmos mix that I might point to that I like over the 5.1 mix. One of them is, again, going back to Shine On Part 7, Part 6, something like that. I'm not sure exactly where that's broken up, but I did notice that there's a little bit of rhythm guitar that I'd never heard before in any other mix, or at least it had been buried. And it was very much justified in the back channels and very loud. And since I picked up on it, I started listening for it in all these other different versions. And I noticed that it was positioned in the front in the quad. And I can't remember exactly where it was in the 5.1, but that is an example of something that, like, hey, it's nice to hear that little bit of rhythm guitar that maybe was buried in previous versions. But there's also many examples of things that I prefer the way that they're handled in the 5.1 mix, such as the beginning of Welcome to the Machine, where now I'm going by memory here, but I think the acoustic guitar, the strums, the open strums, I think it starts off front left, then it hits the back speakers one at a time. And then when the overdubs come in, it comes in stereo. And I don't remember, but I don't think that happens on any other version, but it's awesome. Like it opens up the soundscape so beautifully.
So just to be clear, like the quad mix is not perfect. Like,
no, it's not.
The point I was trying to make before is that, like, I think it has the best philosophy of how to present the individual parts. But like the quad mix has some bad mistakes.
Yeah. Like, why does Brian Humphries always turn down the guitar solos?
Yes, that's one problem. And then in Welcome to the Machine, which is the worst track, I think, in the quad mix, there are those just like blaring acoustic guitars back there, like swamping everything out. Yeah. And probably the worst thing about it is in the song Wish You Were Here, the slide guitar solos are basically absent.
They're absent, which fits the theme of absence, you
can hear them like very faintly in one of the back corners, but some of these things strike me as like just someone forgot to push up a fader.
Or it was done quickly. Yeah. And I did notice that the back speakers are quite loud on the quad mix.
Yeah. So the quad mix on the whole, and I don't know if this is an issue just with the way they transferred it. Like if you turn the back speakers down like 2 to 3 dB, it's quite a bit. Yeah, like gel together a little more. So
yes,
that could be a problem when they did the transfer to digital in 2011. So that I'm not entirely sure about. But yeah, as someone who really likes the kind of like discrete mixes where things are placed, you can very clearly tell when you're sitting like, oh, there's a guitar over there, there's a keyboard over there. I think the philosophy of the quad mix is the most interesting of the three. But if I wanted to just like listen to the album as I know it with like no mistakes, no weirdness, like it just sounds good. Even if it's not as ambitious a mix as I hoped it could be, I would choose the 5.1.
Me too. Yeah, that's my favorite of the three. Now,
one thing we should talk about that was interesting is at the time the 5.1 mix was done, at the beginning of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, there's a little like Rick Wright keyboard part before the vocals come in. And when James Guthrie did his 5.1 mix in 2011 or 2009, whenever it was done before the immersion set, he found that part wasn't actually on the multitracks.
Yeah.
And it would seem apparently what they did was they decided late in the process that they wanted like a keyboard lead there. Mm-hmm. So they had Rick Wright actually play it live as the stereo tape was running. Mm-hmm. So that part, of course, is not on any other mix than the stereo. It's like it's not on the quad mix at all. There's just nothing there. Yeah. So at the time the 5.1 was done, when Rick was still alive, they actually had him play the part again. And that's what's used on the 5.1 mix and also on the Atmos mix. So that's an interesting little bit of, technical backgrounds.
Yeah, and you can't tell because Rick must have used the same equipment that he was using in his live rig. And he was such a great musician. And I think this is a great segue into talking about this new Blu-ray release in a more general sense. And that's to say that in listening through these different mixes of the album, but also the Rarities and the live performance, which is a live bootleg from Los Angeles Sports Arena that's been restored by Steven Wilson, originally recorded by Mike Millard, right? That's the guy's name. Yeah. So what I was saying was, what I got from this was a reminder that Pink Floyd were great musicians at this time. Like one of the best bands, I think, of the era. Maybe not, we're not talking about like technically great, like none of these guys could sit in with a Frank Zappa band. None of these guys would last a day in Steely Dan. But in terms of feel and communicating emotions through their playing, I think these guys were absolutely one of the greats.
Isn't it just unbelievable that they didn't have the foresight to record any of the shows? Like, I feel like it would have been so easy to just have a tape machine running backstage, like so many bands were doing during this period. Yeah. So that bootleg is kind of like the best we're going to get as far as what the Wish You Were Here tour was like. And, it's a bootleg. Like, I'm not going to say like it sounds wonderful, but it's the best we can get. And it sounds pretty good and it's interesting to listen to. And like you said, it gave me an appreciation for how great they were live.
Well, yeah. Well, let's talk about the bootleg for a minute then. So, because I have some criticisms elsewhere, but let's talk about the bootleg first to just kind of go out of order. So, first thing to say is that many of the comments that I got on my announcement video when this was announced, and I did like a little informational thing, was people were upset that the bootleg wasn't available on CD. It was available on the vinyl, I believe, as part of that big expensive box set, and available on this Blu-ray disc. Well, to those folks, I wanted to express that this bootleg, you can't expect it to be pristine, live at Pompeii, great sound quality. You can't expect this to be fantastic fidelity, but once your ears adjust to it, I think it's clear. I think it's well balanced. I think it captures a phenomenal performance. And, I can hear everything that's going on. Sometimes the vocals are a little bit dicey in terms of performance and, my ability to pick them out. But I think what Steven Wilson has done is he's gone back to Millard's recordings and picked some of the best sources and kind of patched them all together so that it's the best available presentation of what's essentially, a guy sitting in the audience with a tape recorder. Now, there's things like, the sound effects are kind of hard to hear. And I was thinking of you when I was listening to that, because I thought, I bet that's that quadraphonic system. When you hear a sound effect start and then it disappears, that's probably because he's sitting up at the front and those are elements that are hitting the back speakers.
They
had a cool moment.
They had that thing, the azimuth coordinator. It was basically like a giant pan pot, and they would use it to fly sounds around. And I think on all the other tours, they used it as well, like for Animals in the Wall. So I guess it remains to be seen if whenever they do a box set of The Wall, if any of those shows were actually like professionally recorded.
Well, there's the Earl's Court
right
document. And then there's a video, I think, that's a film from Earl's Court that was supposed to be used for the Wall movie. And, they probably wisely decided to hire Alan Parker and do like an extended music video. But the reason why they didn't use that footage at the time is because it came out too dark. But I feel like with today's technology, they could probably boost that exposure up a little bit and we could actually see what was going on at the Wall shows. but that's neither here nor there.
I mean, look at how good they made the Pompeii film look. I mean, it's not the same thing, but it goes to show you.
Yeah, well, those films were those shows were professionally filmed, so they're quality. That's quality footage. It's just a case of Roger Waters deciding that it's worth doing or not, and that's a big if.
To your point about like sound quality expectations for the bootleg, I saw a comment on the Steve Hoffman forums that like sums this up so perfectly that I have to share it. And thank you for whoever commented this, but it was like, bootlegs are like cilantro. Like some people taste the spice and appreciate it, and some people just think it tastes like soap. And I think that really is a perfect way of summing it up, because some people really appreciate bootlegs and some people are like this doesn't sound good.
And I think that if they would have put it on CD, there would have been an expectation for it to sound like the Wembley performance, which parts of that were included on the Immersion box set. And that's one thing that hasn't ported over to this edition, is that live at Wembley show. But that's a Dark Side of the Moon era show. So this is much more, I think, period appropriate. But one comment on the set list. I think it's interesting that they focused on a lot of the epics. The only short song we get is Have a Cigar, and it's a gnarly version, man. Like it's an excellent version of Have a Cigar, but it's couched in between the two Wish You Were Here parts. Otherwise you get Raving and Drooling, you get You've Got to Be Crazy, Shine On, obviously. You get the entirety of Dark Side of the Moon. And here we're talking about Dark Side of the Moon 2 years after it was released. And these dudes are still pushing it. They're still experimenting with it. They're extending sections. There's moments where the backing singers are improvising off of David Gilmour and Rick Wright. So it's an interesting listen, and it's longer. Like, I think Any Color You Like is absolutely the highlight in terms of that, like, adding in ad-libbing and extending sections. And then, I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I wonder what Pink Floyd at Pompeii would have sounded like with this lineup, with the backing singers and with Dick Perry on saxophone. And what happens? But Roger Waters calls off echoes, and they do echoes, and the girls are singing back up in those vocal harmonies, and it sounds lovely. And we even get to hear Dick Perry blow a little sax over one of the earlier sections of echoes. So I greatly enjoyed this. And I'd never heard it before. I know this is a famous bootleg that a lot of fans love, and I can see why, because it definitely, and here we are falling into our usual cliche, but I think it highlights the more quote unquote progressive elements of the band. And I do think it's interesting that they didn't do, the Wish You Were Here title track. And it's interesting that they didn't do Welcome to the Machine, but I'm thrilled with what we got here.
Yeah, I mean, besides the Atmos mix, I feel like this was kind of the other big selling point of this new Blu-ray in terms of, new content that wasn't on the Immersion set or the SACD or any of the various other versions of Wish You Were Here you could buy. So yeah, with the caveat that like it's not the most pristine recording, I agree. It's very interesting to listen to, and I'm glad it's on here.
Yeah.
And to your point about them focusing like on the epics in the set list, I thought that was interesting, because one of the comments that David Gilmour made in those interviews that we were talking about was he was like, one of the things he was kind of annoyed about that after they had found so much success was in the band's previous performances before Dark Side of the Moon came out. Like, they had these really quiet audiences who were attentive and would listen. But then by the time they got to America and they're touring Dark Side of the Moon, it's just like people screaming for money the whole time. So I thought it was interesting that they went back to focusing on these longer songs, even though like that wasn't necessarily what all their new fans were hoping for. But
yeah,
I hope people appreciate it at the time. I mean, I appreciate listening to it now.
Yeah, and to their credit, like, this version of Money is slamming.
Oh yeah.
It's a great version. So yeah, we should talk a little bit about the rarities. And to my understanding, only the wine glasses segment, the Have a Cigar alternate version, which is Dave and Roger singing, with, I'm pretty sure, one verse sung by Roy Harper. There's one verse that I think is still sung by Roy Harper on this version. And the Wish You Were Here featuring Stefan Grappelli, I think is how you say that guy's name. I think everything else here is previously unreleased. I think it is worth mentioning that version of Wish You Were Here with Grappelli's violin is gorgeous. It's drop dead beautiful, in my opinion.
To me, that and the Shine On You Crazy Diamond, like mixed as one extended track, were the two most interesting things to me of the Rarities.
Yeah.
And the Shine On You Crazy Diamond, like it's not like they just took the two halves of the original, and it's like a new mix by Guthrie in stereo,
yeah,
which had never been done before for this album. Usually when Guthrie does these mixes, he only mixes them in 5/1. It's not like there's a new stereo mix, except for Animals. So I thought that was notable unto itself.
Yeah, and I had thoughts about that. So we do get an early version that's an instrumental rough mix of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. And you can hear the two parts. I say two parts, it's actually 9 parts. Yeah. But I think it's 7 parts because they didn't have the ambient part on yet. So technically speaking, we'll call it 7 parts just in general. You can hear those 7 parts like conjoined, and it feels like there's some parts that are a little longer, like maybe they cut them back for the final version. And then I noticed when when I got to the parts 1 through 9, the new stereo mix, that he actually extended the segue a little bit, because with the way that it is on the album, the saxophone, Dick Perry's saxophone, kind of trails out as it fades away, and he kind of faded it back in. So he did restore the length, like he didn't cut anything out. But it was my impression that it was recorded as one single piece of music. Now, have you looked into the history to find out if they did it that way? Because I think it was performed as one piece of music, right?
I mean, I don't like, I wouldn't be equipped to answer that. Like, I don't know for sure, but from listening to those interviews, I remember that all the guys in the band would say that they would have to play the songs all the way through to get a take.
Yeah.
And I think there was some controversy, like at the beginning of the sessions, where they had played one of these long songs all the way through. I think it was Shine On You Crazy Diamond. They ended up having to start again because of some issue with the tape machine or something.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure, someone could correct us if we're wrong, that it was played as one track.
Yeah.
And there's just an edit there.
Yeah, that was my thought too. I thought I remembered reading at one point that it was intended to be one single track, and then at some point late in the game, they said probably Roger Waters decided to cut it up and bookend it, sort of the way that Echoes is bookending Pink Floyd at Pompeii. But I made a note that I think is interesting, that I do think that Shine On You Crazy Diamond is stronger as a 25-minute piece. However, the Wish You Were Here album is stronger with having them bookend it, because, you go through all these different moods, from the kind of like, bluesy feel of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, melancholic feel, to like the ominous and menacing feel of something like Welcome to the Machine, to the kind of grunginess of Have a Cigar, the sliminess of Have a Cigar. And then you get this delicate little beautiful, almost country and western piece that is Wish You Were Here. And you can hear on some of these alternates that they were heading even further in the country direction than what it ended up. I actually think it's one of the album's strongest moments when you segue from like that simplistic, beautiful country tinged title track back into the melancholic psychedelia, the dark side of Pink Floyd with a song like Shine On parts 6 through 9. So yeah, I think, just back to my point here, I think it was better for the album to split it up, even though it's stronger maybe for the song to have a full piece like that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's hard to say because we're just used to it the way it's always been.
Yeah.
Like it's easy to say like, well, it could have been better if you switch these songs around. But I think the like you said, the flow between all the different styles of each song is kind of what keeps the record interesting.
Yes.
It's kind of like you start off in kind of this place that's sort of sad, but like not totally, like you said, and then you're really going into darkness with Welcome to the Machine and Have a Scar, and then like the title track's like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. But
then at the end, you're sort of going back into sort of a darker place again.
Yeah.
And I think that was very much intentional, the way they sequenced it. So yeah, I suppose I agree with you. Like the full version, like I said, it's interesting to hear how it sounds, but I didn't come back from it thinking like, I wish it was like this on the album.
No, yeah, exactly. I like it. I like it for the piece to hear it as one unbroken track. I also want to make one comment about the sound quality of the new stereo mix. I think it's excellent. And I couldn't help but think, I wish the Atmos mix sounded as good as the new stereo mix does. For one thing, it's not as loud to my ears. It's like a quieter master. And it seems like the effects choices are more in keeping with the original effects choices, because there are a few moments on the Atmos mix where they've changed effects. And, I'm one of those people that I have heard Wish You Were Here probably 100 times. So it's like the slightest little change in effects, and I'm probably going to pick up on it. This slightly anachronistic choice, and I'm going to go like, oh, that's not original.
It's just weird because like the 5.1 mix was very faithful to the original.
Exactly.
Maybe a little too faithful, I would say, in the sense that as for how the surround mix is done. But it's weird like that after they approached it that way, like now that they're doing the Atmos mix, a decade later, it's like, oh, like, let's make it sound different. Like,
yeah,
I wish they'd kept like a lot more of the stuff that worked in the 5.1 mix.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Even if they'd have just used the 5.1 mix as a basis and then expanded upon it with heights and sides and all that stuff. But there's a few other things I want to talk about just briefly. The first one is that I think that the original stereo mix that's included here, I think the original stereo mix that's included here is excellent. And I think it sounds better than my copy from the 90s that I have.
Yeah, I haven't quite kept track of like all discussions on the forums, because people have been trying to figure out like whether it's the same transfer that was used for the immersion set or the same version that's on like the HD Tracks website. I think the consensus is that it is the same one that was on the immersion Blu-ray, which makes sense because the quad mix is also the same transfer that's on the immersion Blu-ray. And yeah, I mean, honestly, like I've never really heard a version of this album that sounds bad.
Right. Yeah. Oh, you got to try really hard to make this album sound bad.
Like the original vinyl was good. The original CD was like pretty good. The stereo on the SACD was really good. And like, this is no different. It's not brick walled or compressed or anything. It sounds good.
Yeah. And the last thing I kind of want to talk about before we always do our what do we want to see next, and this is an obvious one, but we need to address the playback issue of the quad mix, because this is really important, because obviously one of the selling points of this to me is that this version that I have in my hand here, which is just the 5.1 mix, will cost you about $60 to get. And when I picked it up, this was probably the best option for getting any surround mix of this album. And I think it's great just to have it available here again for less than $30. But I have to say that, again, this is one of the areas that I'm disappointed in, that I was really looking forward to being able to hear the quad mix, but my player or my AVR doesn't decode it properly. And I've had a couple of messages from viewers of ours complaining about the same thing, asking me for what would cause this problem. And I thought we could just take a moment for you to explain what that issue might be.
Yeah, my understanding of it is that if you present the quad mix as like basically a 4.0 file, like a stream that only has 4 channels, sometimes the equipment, some receivers or AVRs some receivers or Blu-ray players don't know how to interpret that, and they just drop the rear channels. Yeah. I know some people have complained about this with some of the Quadio releases, which are done the same way, except those are in a DTS container, and this is just PCM, the quad on this. So usually what I think should be standard issue is if you just make the quad a 5.1 track, and have the center and sub be silent. Yeah. And then you would have basically full compatibility. And this is what I do whenever I rip any of my discs that have quad mixes. I always add those silent channels just to make sure the resultant FLACS or MKV or whatever I'm using will just play anywhere. Yeah. So I don't know why they didn't do that. It's another reason why I think they just reused what they did for the immersion set, because the immersion Blu-ray was the same way, where it was just a 4.0 track.
Yeah, but it's very disappointing. And, you got to think that majority of Pink Floyd fans are not going to have the resources to do that. What you were able to do, create like a phantom center and sub channel.
It would have been like an easy fix when they were assembling
Yeah.
the Blu-ray. So I don't know why they didn't do that, but I'm glad they actually put the quad mix on here. They didn't put the Alan Parsons quad of Dark Side of the Moon on the Dark Side Atmos Blu-ray.
Which we need to do an update on our quad video because I got a chance to hear that.
even though it was on the immersion set, it wasn't on the Atmos Blu-ray. What a mix that one.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into it too far because we're already pushing the hour mark, but yeah, that is the most I've enjoyed the Dark Side of the Moon album in quite a long time. That Alan Parsons quad mix. So I do encourage our viewers to go check it out if you can. So let's first talk about our recommendation. Do we recommend this Blu-ray? I say we do, just with a caveat.
So I would say if the only thing you want it for is the Atmos mix, like if you're like me and you already have the immersion set, it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, if you liked the previous James Guthrie Atmos mixes of Dark Side of the Moon and Animals, chances are you'll probably like this one. Some caveats, like we mentioned, there are a couple weird sound quality things. If you don't have the immersion set, I would definitely recommend it because you're getting the quad mix. Of course, the caveat there is you might have issues playing it because of the way they've encoded it on the disc.
Yeah.
And even if you're watching this and you know nothing about surround or don't care, the rarities and the bootlegs are interesting. And a lot of them were not on the immersion set.
Yeah.
So all in all, like given the low price point, really it's kind of hard not to recommend this.
Yeah. But it could have been better.
It could have been better. Yeah, that's my kind of final thought on it as well.
Yeah, and to me, I think it's great to have the 5.1 mix in print available, and you don't have to go to an exclusive website like Analog Productions and spend $60 just for one mix. At least with this, you're spending half the price, and you're getting a nice show with it too, and the extras, which I didn't have the immersion set, so all of this was great for me. I don't think I'm going to run out and sell this anytime soon because this is one of my favorite discs, and I've developed something of a sentimental attachment to it, so I don't think it's going anywhere. But obviously, the last thing we do for these videos is talk about what we would like to see next from the Pink Floyd camp, and I think it's obvious that both of us would like to see The Wall get some sort of treatment because it's the only album aside from the film soundtrack, which if you have the DVD, there's a 5.1 mix of it. It's never been released in any kind of surround format at all.
Well, there was an immersion set for it.
Yeah.
Back in the early 2010s, but it was the only one that didn't have a surround mix. And James Guthrie was interviewed at the time, I believe, by Paul Sinclair at SDE. And he made this comment that like they've been working on a 5.1 mix for years, but it's been slowed down by like issues restoring the multitracks, were I think his words. Yeah,
because it's cut between the movie and the album multitracks. Yeah.
So it's taken them years and years just to kind of assemble a complete set of recordings to do the mix from.
Yeah.
I mean, if you know the record, you can understand it's a complicated album. There's a lot of songs. And I think there's been at least one update in the years since, like maybe around 2019, 2020, where Guthrie was like, yeah, I'm kind of still working on it. So at this point, I think there would be an Atmos mix and a 5.1 mix.
Yeah.
Back in 2010, obviously there was no Atmos, so they were just talking about doing 5.1. So I think that one and the final cut, I think would also be good in a surround mix.
By the way, I love the final cut. I know that's not a popular opinion, but I like that album a great deal. So I would be all for a final cut.
I would also want it to just kind of complete the discography.
Yeah.
As far as like the stuff that James Guthrie would be asked to do, I think those are the two records that he would be well suited for, given that he worked on them originally.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, he has to do The Wall.
Yeah. So I think whatever criticisms I may have of the way that he approaches these mixes, I think he is the right person to remix The Wall.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, wholeheartedly.
And then to go further back in time, as we've talked about in other videos, I think with Steven Wilson having done Pompeii, I think he could be the right person to do some of the earlier like pre-Dark Side material.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the studio version of Echoes is like one of my most wanted like songs I'd love to hear in Atmos. And it's funny because he's mixed 2 versions of Echoes already. He's done the live one on Pompeii, and he's done the Saucer Full of Secrets version, which is only on streaming. That's a really cool Atmos mix, by the way, if you check that out.
Well, hold up. What Saucer Full of Secrets? What are you talking about?
So the Nick Mason's Saucer Full of Secrets like tribute band that has
right.
Gary Kemp and Guy Pratt.
Yeah, okay. They worked with Wilson?
Yeah, so he did an Atmos mix of a live version of Echoes that they did like recently.
Oh, terrific.
That was recorded, in like 2021 or 22, something like that. I've been trying to like angle for them to put that as a download. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be great.
And it would be cool to have a whole Saucer Full of Secrets live show mixed by Steven in Atmos or 5.1 or something. They had put out that Live at the Roundhouse Blu-ray a couple years ago that it wasn't mixed by Steven, but it had a surround mix, as I recall.
But that's like a blind spot for me. I need to check out that Nick Mason stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, like Metal would be great.
Yeah.
Obscured by Clouds is an album that's never had a surround mix. Technically Metal has had one. There was that like rejected Andy Jackson mix, which is a whole other conversation.
The secret surround mix.
Yep. Adam Hart Mother, there's a quad mix that's quite good.
Yes. It's outstanding.
But it would be interesting to hear a new attempt at it in 5.1 or Atmos. And then the stuff with Sid on it, if it could be done, that would be really cool.
Well, I don't think we have many multi-channel mixes from that far back, like mid 60s. There's not a whole lot. There's like the Beatles, but not a whole lot else. One thing I would add that I'm not sure how our subscribers will feel about it, but I think the Roger Waters catalog could use some love. I think
pros and cons.
Yeah. Pros and cons of hitchhiking would be an excellent surround mix, as would Radio Chaos.
Yeah, the only one we've got is we have Amused to Death is his only studio record. Which was also mixed by Guthrie.
Yeah,
or both originally and the 5.1.
Yeah, he did a great job with that one.
And if we're going into the solo stuff, obviously David's albums. About Face and David Gilmour. There was a rumor at the time that Wet Dream came out that Steven was going to do those, but I think it ended up being unfounded.
Yeah.
And then there's the other Rick record, Broken China, which I would be interested in hearing because Wet Dream was a record I'd never heard before, and I really liked the Steven Wilson mixes. So
yeah, it's a great album. I'd never heard it either, but I bought it just on the strength of it being a Wilson mix. And it's great.
It's to sort of relate it more to this conversation. It has a lot of the feel of Wish You Were Here, that record.
Jonathan, I want to thank you once again for joining us. This has been a great and enlightening conversation. I hope our viewers enjoyed it as well. Don't forget to subscribe to both of our channels. So if you go to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and both of our channels will pop up. And you're probably subscribed to one of us, but just make sure you're subscribed to both of us. We'd really appreciate it. Don't forget to also leave us a comment. Let us know your impressions on these new mixes. I've heard from many of you already, and I know many of you love this mix. So I'm really curious to see the conversations that take place in the comment section, because I know this is one example where you and I are not exactly in agreement in maybe with what the popular opinion is. So really curious to see that dialogue go. Don't forget also to like the video, because that boosts our visibility algorithmically. Jonathan and I have already a couple of videos planned in the very near future, probably the new year, like the Frankie Goes to Hollywood album. We've got Brian Ferry's Boys and Girls. Both of those are supposed to be delivered today, but I haven't seen them. We were talking about doing Split Ends, but before the end of the year, we are going to do a speculation video on what we would like to see in the new year. And this isn't going to be purely speculative. A lot of this is going to be like looking at anniversary dates and saying, hey, this would be a good time to think about this album, such as the Mothers of Invention's Freak Out album, which will be celebrating its 60th anniversary next year. So you want to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Also, go and check out our appearance on Life in Surround, because we just did a video on the best Atmos mixes of 2025. It's a great video. I watched about half of it last night, and I thought it turned out wonderfully. And you don't want to miss that. So, Jonathan, it's been fun as always.
Yep.
And we'll talk real soon, my friend. Take care.
Yeah. Same to you.